About 3 decades ago, when I came to know Jesus as my Lord and Savior, I was encouraged and mentored by a wonderful couple, Arthur and Margaret G. And they were constantly talking about Brian and Joy Turner, who came to Christ about the same time as me. And we did connect, and just the delight in growing together in our new faith. You can imagine how meaningful it is now to be welcoming their little boy to my set, Paul Turner. I said, Paul, I could be your mother. Paul Turner is a recording artist, a pastor of worship at Emmanuel Baptist Church in one of the largest, fastest growing cities certainly in Canada and in Ontario, Barrie, where I lived for 7 years. And his beautiful wife, Angela, of 12 years.
That's right.
It is.
Yes.
I want to first say congratulations to you both for your latest project, Paul, Greater Than the Song. What a beautiful cover. And what a lovely project. Some interesting names participating. This is one of the backup singers.
That's right.
Who else helped with this one?
Yeah, my producer on that is Philip Jans. He's a very well-known producer in Canada and abroad. One of the finest worship producers, I believe. He's worked with Brian Dirksen for many, many years and recording many people like Brian Dirksen and Catherine Scott and Andy Park and other worship leaders. So
And in
it's been a
fact,
great
Brian
experience.
Dirksen's singing on here as well, was he not?
Yeah, we've been very blessed to have Brian join on that project, and he co-wrote one of the songs on there as well, and then we did a duet on there. So that was a real blessing to be able to work with him.
I was also encouraged that you have such a personal connection with him, because as he shared at length recently on the program, he has 2 special needs sons, 2 of his 6 children.
Yeah.
And we just see so much grace in his life. I'm sure he's been an encouragement to you as a couple.
He's been a huge encouragement, and he's been very generous with his time and his counsel, and you know, it's been a great honor to be able to pick his brain about different things and ask some difficult questions on someone who's kind of on the other end of the journey, to be able to get some feedback on where he's been and how he's been able to walk that journey. So, but he's just a great guy, and in my opinion, the best worship leader that's out there right now.
Oh,
so,
right.
yeah.
There it is. Angela Bryn, your firstborn, was how old when Scarlett came along?
He would have been 2.
2 years old. And although he wanted a brother,
He did.
he got excited pretty quickly.
When he saw his sister, he fell in love with her the first time he saw her, and he was just her little best friends, you know. He just loved her. He still does.
You were telling me before we came to air that you were looking at some early home movies of Scarlett. Very hard to look back at those early days up to about 18 months because you had a different little girl then.
It's like having 2 kids in one body, I think, sometimes, because you look at the old pictures and she's waving goodbye and she's saying words and she's running around pretending to talk on the telephone, and then she can't do any of that now. She can't pretend. She has a couple of words that she will say, Dada being one of them. But yeah, she's just not there in that capability anymore.
Little girl who had 50 words before you started losing her. Tell us about that, Paul.
She became very secluded and would go into corners, and when you walked into a room, she would no longer acknowledge you. She would no longer respond to you when you say, "Hi, Scarlett," or "Daddy's home," or she wouldn't run to me anymore. There was none of that interaction. And this all happened in the course of 2 or 3 months, where we began to see a steady decline in her sociability. She began to obsess over books. She would just hours on end, Angela, just looking through pages, and when she became frustrated, she would go against the wall and bang her head and become very self-abusive. And so those were some of the early indicators that we just realized something wasn't right, and we needed to find out what was going on.
What did you do? Obviously, medical
Yeah, there was a screening.
advice.
There was a screening, and it was called a Let's Grow screening clinic if you had any concerns about the development of your child. And so I took Scarlett right away because I'd seen her words disappear, and at that point she was still more present, you know, socially, but her words were completely disappearing, and some of her motor skills were gone. So I took her, and they right then mainstreamed me into a speech therapist and all the therapy.
I've learned a lot of new terms. This is really a fascinating journey through what is available out there. IBI therapy, intense behavioral intervention. Did that begin right away?
No, and in fact, it's very expensive. And so what happens, the process is you get on a list that says you might be autistic. You have to get a diagnosis from a professional, and then you actually go to an organization called CNARC, and then you get on another wait list, and they have to confirm that it is indeed the true diagnosis, and then you get put on a wait list for the government to actually fund you, and we are still on that wait list. It's a very expensive therapy. It costs about $30,000 a year just for 20 hours a month. So it's our church family has been amazing, and our friends have been amazing, and they've helped us with that. But it's a hard therapy to get, and it's very expensive.
And that was after a definite diagnosis.
Yeah.
I think Scarlett was 3, wasn't she, before you got a diagnosis?
She was around two-ish, 2.5, and then we started the process of getting some therapy when she was 3.
Dark time, dark days. You'd already struggled with things that heaven had allowed. Your dad's early death, Angela. Paul, you talk about that, wrestling with God because of hard things.
Yeah, it's the cosmic question, right? I mean, as Christians, we trust the heart of God. But sometimes it's so difficult to trust the hand of God. We know the character of God. We know that He's good. We know that He's faithful, that He's kind, that He's long-suffering, He's patient with us. But sometimes some of the things that He doesn't seem to make sense this side of heaven, and so it's very difficult for us to wrap our brain around those things. And one of the early things that we struggled with was back in the millennium, Angela's father succumbed to cancer, a long battle with cancer. And that was, I think, probably the first time that both of us really started to ask those hard questions. Is God really good? You know, and it took us into that journey of just asking those questions. And I think as Christians, we need to remember that God is big enough for those questions. I mean, read the Psalms. I mean, there's a man who struggled with a ton of stuff, and he asked some very difficult questions of God. Why have you forsaken me? Where are you, God? And that was very much where we were at in our relationship at that point. And I really believe that was probably a preparation for what was to come with Scarlett. Because
so you were ready for this?
I don't think anyone's ever ready, regardless of where they're at. I think you're always expecting things to work out, you know, as they do in Hollywood, right? I mean, you want that nice, you know, perfect Disney ending. And in this particular case, it was very much a surprise for us. I'd been in the ministry, went right out of high school, right into Bible college, finished my undergraduate degree, my master's degree. Everything we had done was to go into the ministry, and then all of a sudden, wham, in a left field, we had this happen. And the obvious questions were, Lord, I'm one of your servants. I'm one of your, you know, I serve you faithfully, and everything I've done, I've tried to do for you. How could you let this happen to us? You know, why us? Why not someone else? And so those were questions we had to ask and work through. And I think that ultimately this side of heaven will never receive the answers to that. But God has been so faithful and so good to us. And so it's been a journey.
One of the things that shines through the journey, your church family. Can you imagine taking this journey without the support of your church community?
No. And you know what? That's something that autism has taught me so much, is that God loves you through His people, and they are His hands. And there has been so many times I have been down on the floor crying because I couldn't deal with the situation at hand with Scarlett. And someone will call me and say, hey, I was just praying for you. Or someone will call and say, hey, do you need some help with the housework today? And it's like God saying to me, I love you. This is my hand telling you, I love you. I'm going to touch you where you are. I'm not changing this right now for you, but I'm going to tell you I love you. And they have been God's love to us through this whole situation.
I think the biggest question that Angela and I ask through this process, and I get emotional more talking about this, because when we start talking community, I don't know how the people who aren't in a church community, I don't know how they do it. Like with the daily challenges that we have in our home, which are small compared to, I know, many others that have very more difficult circumstances. I don't know how they do it without Jesus and without his community and his church loving them. And I mean, our church community has been amazing. The IBI therapy that we were just talking about, that's $30,000 a year, we did a fundraiser, and our church community, through there in Barrie and then again in Elmdale, was able to raise $30,000 for that. People giving out of their pockets.